I don't dig the soil in the gardens as much as I used to, as most of the growing spaces have been transitioned into some form of no-dig or minimum tillage methods. When I do feel that it is appropriate to dig over the soil of an existing bed or to clear a new space, I found that it can be useful to wait until the conditions are better for digging and to potentially use time to our advantage. There was a useful example of this with some of the growing spaces of the red gardens that had become very overgrown with weeds this year, mainly because of my own lack of capacity. I've been using a method of scalping the soil to remove the top growth of weeds, and there were a few beds that I wanted to completely dig over to remove the roots of some of the more problematic weeds and to fully re-establish the beds so that they would be ready for planting. But I knew that it was better to wait after doing the scalping before doing the digging, mainly because the soil was too dry. The abundant growth of weeds had pulled a lot of moisture out of the soil during the warm and dry weather we had, and our sandy loam soil has enough silt in it to become quite hard when dry. I could have watered the beds thoroughly over a couple of days to loosen up the soil quite a bit, but I decided to wait and let the forecasted rain do the job. Over the past week or so, after a fair amount of rain, the soil seemed to be in just the right state of moisture where it was easy to dig and the larger clumps crumbled under a slight amount of pressure. When the soil is in this condition, I find that the remaining roots of the weeds are much easier to pull out of the ground and to shake off most of the soil. Waiting those few weeks also allowed a lot of the thinner roots of the weeds that had been killed off to break down quite a bit, so they weren't holding onto the soil as much, which made loosening the soil a lot easier. And it was also enough time to allow any roots of the perennial weeds to regrow so that I could locate them all and make sure I completely dug them out. But in some cases, I think I might have waited a little bit too long to dig over the soil, as the flush of tiny weed seedlings had grown enough to produce a fairly dense mat of roots that clung onto the soil. Most of these seedlings will be killed by cultivating the soil, but it did create some clumps of seedlings that were a little bit harder to break up and bury. So if I dug too early, the soil would have been too dry, and there would have been too many small roots holding all the soil together. And if I waited too long without any kind of intervention, the weeds would take over the bed again. And if it continues to rain too much, the soil may become too wet to dig without causing some long-term damage to the soil structure. With the digging that I did just before the weed seedlings really started to become established and the soil had the right amount of moisture in it, I seem to have hit the sweet spot where the soil was the easiest to dig.